Welcome back to Moon Magnolia's YouTube channel. I am Rebecca, and today I am making a simple DIY Christmas garland and using up the last of the fall produce with freeze-dried pumpkin and serving up 2 early winter recipes. The transition from Thanksgiving to Christmas is really abrupt, and I have to be honest, I am not here for it. I am not here for the pressure to just forget about Thanksgiving and move right into Christmas. So on these days that I'm filming, I'm actually in a transition mode where I'm preparing for Christmas, but also wrapping up fall. And this can kind of be a challenging time for me, and I think for a lot of people, because there's a lot to do to wrap up the things around your house for fall, but also to make a magical Christmas. So I am first starting with a little bit of fun and some DIY just to get things going. I am making a dried orange garland for the house. So here I am just simply slicing some oranges. I got a big box of them at Costco, and I am putting them in the dehydrator. Out in my garage, I have a Cosori dehydrator that I loaded up. And I dried these at 135 degrees, and it took 3 full days for them to dry. There's a lot of moisture in oranges. Now, you could do this in your oven, most definitely, but I like to use the dehydrator because it does take a long time, and also I need my oven for other things. So after 3 days, I laid out some paper, I got some butcher's twine, and then I just measured along the window to see how much string I need. Then what I like to do when I'm doing projects like this for something long, like a garland, is I like to find the center of the string and start there. So here I'm just folding it in half, finding the center, and then I glue an orange right in the middle and I work from this center out. Now to do this, I actually used a cordless hot glue gun that my husband bought. I thought it was going to be a silly purchase. I was like, why does anyone need a cordless hot glue gun? I'm here to tell you, everybody needs a cordless hot glue gun. This thing is awesome. So here it is. It takes a battery. You just turn it on and go, and it makes doing any DIY so much easier. I have a link for this in the description box below if you want to check it out on Amazon. And then I simply just take a strip of glue across the orange and I kind of mush the string down on top of it, give it a second, and then I do a second strip of glue over it just to make sure it's secure, because these will be hanging, so you just want to make sure that it is glued enough to hold the weight. Now, I had previously made one of these a few days before for my fireplace. This one's actually going above my kitchen window. And the one that I made for my fireplace, I used a traditional craft glue and it worked just fine. But this is more of a carpenter glue. And first of all, it's not a joke. It'll get everywhere. That's why I recommend putting some paper down on whatever surface you're using. But it also worked a lot better. It was a lot easier to use. It dried a lot faster. So I definitely recommend that. I am all about DIY Christmas this year. To be honest with you, I have not done Christmas crafts or Christmas DIYs in a while, but I'm really feeling it this year because I want to have much less stuff. I don't want to store all the Christmas stuff. I want the things that I have to be meaningful and useful, and I also want them to be beautiful. And one of the things that I really like about a dried orange garland or other DIY Christmas things is that it brings in a natural, earthy element into our homes, which for me, for someone who's really inspired by homesteading and other DIY lifestyles that aren't necessarily easy to replicate in the suburbs, because I do live in a traditional or modern suburb neighborhood, if you will, this brings in some of those elements that are kind of hard to cultivate in the type of lifestyle and neighborhood that I have. I paired this with a garland that I found on sale at Michael's. This is just like a fake garland, and I got this, so hopefully it'll last a couple of years, and it looks really beautiful. In the bare spots, I also added a couple Christmas ornaments because there were some patches that needed to be filled, and it looks great in the kitchen. This early winter home DIY was super simple, and it was a great way to kick off the holiday season, but without it being such a burden or overwhelming, because sometimes the holidays and getting through Thanksgiving and into Christmas can really be a lot, and it can take a huge toll on us, especially as women and mothers when we feel like we have to keep doing these things. But the other thing I needed to do is deal with all of these pumpkins. So I made, if you remember a few videos ago, I made my little 2-year-old what I called a pumpkin wonderland in the backyard with a bunch of pumpkins. Originally, I planned on canning these, but according to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, you can can squash and pumpkins like this, but it's not really that delicious, and freezing is a better option. So what I am doing here is I am getting these pumpkins processed for eating, for freezing, and for freeze drying. A few of these pumpkins were really hard to cut. This one in particular, my husband had to deal with it first. Look, I don't know what happened, but when I was pregnant, I didn't get a stretch mark. I didn't get a single craving. I didn't get a single food aversion. I didn't get a day of morning sickness, but I got really weak hands that have remained. So my husband had to help me cut these. But once he got them cut, I just scooped out the seeds. A grapefruit spoon is a really good tool for scooping out the seeds and like the guts of the pumpkin. Put them on a baking sheet, drizzled with a little bit of olive oil, sprinkled with some salt and pepper, and I roasted them at 425. I don't have a particular time for how long they took to roast. It depended on the size of the pumpkin, the thickness, and how I cut them. But I did this all day. I think I ended up with about 10 pumpkins that I had to process, and I had to take little breaks in between to go pick up my daughter from preschool and get her down for a nap and that sort of stuff. So it ended up taking all day. Eventually, I was able to get through all the pumpkins. You'll see here, this pumpkin was a lot easier to cut. The more traditional ones that have a thinner meat to them, they are easier to cut and to process. So if you are thinking about doing this next year, do keep in mind which ones are easy and hard to cut, because it makes a difference in the quality of your life when you are doing this. When they were finished roasting, I peeled or cut the skin off depending on the pumpkin. Some were easier to peel than others. Theoretically, I guess you could peel them before you roast them, but for me, that seemed a little more difficult. Another thing you could do, which I actually forgot about until I was finished this, is you can put the pumpkin in the oven for a little bit. And then when it's soft enough, you can cut into it and chop it up that way. That would be a lot easier. So here, this is actually a few days prior. I started one pumpkin and then I got really distracted for a few days. So this is a few days prior. That's why I'm wearing something totally different. I actually made a pumpkin soup with this. And now I will forewarn you that this was not the soup I intended to make, and it's not the soup that I think I would make again, but it's the soup I made that day. I had planned on making a different soup. I didn't have any of the ingredients I needed, so I guess next time I need to plan better. So I just made do with what I had around the house. So I sauteed some onion, I threw in some of the roasted pumpkin and let it cook a little bit, and then I added in a little bit of chicken broth. Normally I like to use bone broth, but I actually haven't made any bone broth recently, so I just used the regular chicken broth from Costco. And then I brought this to a boil and then reduced it to a simmer on the stove. I also tossed in a little bit of apple cider vinegar and maple syrup. I use that because I have a butternut squash soup recipe that has apple cider vinegar in it, and it's really good. This was also good, but I think it's better with butternut squash soup than pumpkin. But in any case, I blended this up with an immersion blender, added in a little bit of heavy cream, some salt, pepper, and threw in a few seasonings that I had on hand. I also made a giant mess with the immersion blender. Now, if I had the right ingredients, what I would have done with this is I would have put in coconut cream instead of heavy cream, and I would have seasoned it with curry powder. I have made that in the past, and it is so good. It's good as a soup. You can add vegetables and rice and make it more of a traditional curry. That is delicious. And honestly, even with the way I made this, if you held out the apple cider vinegar and then just kept it like a creamy base soup, you could do all sorts of stuff with it. So it's really nice as a base meal or a base soup to use up some pumpkin that you might have. But the reality is I have more pumpkin than I could ever make into soup or curry. And I just got a Harvest Right freeze dryer. If you want to learn more about these, I have a link for Harvest Right in the description box below. So what I'm doing here is is I am chopping up some of the roasted pumpkin and getting it prepared for freeze drying. I am brand new to freeze drying, so I don't have a lot of expert advice yet. I do plan on publishing some videos in the future that are more informative and based upon my experience freeze drying. But right now, since I'm new, I'm just experimenting with what works. So I am just mushing a bunch of roasted pumpkin onto the trays and trying to get them filled and about the same thickness on the tray so that way they freeze dry evenly. Now I have my freeze dryer in the garage. Again, I live in the suburbs. I don't have a setup for freeze drying and food preservation. I also live at sea level, so there's no basement anywhere around here for me to build some sort of preservation station or have a cellar or a food storage pantry or anything like that. So being able to preserve these pumpkins is a great way for me as someone who doesn't have a homestead or a farm or a cellar to have preserved food, but in a way that doesn't take up a ton of space. And the freeze dryer itself is compact enough to fit on a table in my garage. So here I am just sliding the trays into the freeze dryer, and really it's a set it and forget it sort of thing. You just put the food on the trays, put the trays in the freeze dryer, close the door, hit go, and live the rest of your life until it is ready. This did take about 40 hours to finish. I am just bringing in the trays now that everything is done a few days later and preparing it to just go into a jar. This was 2.5, maybe 3-gallon Ziploc bags that I had filled with roasted pumpkin. So you can see here, they come out, of course, very dry. I can lift it as one sheet and then it crumbles like a powder. That's how dry it is. So I actually put all of this pumpkin into a Ziploc bag, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know, actually, I do know, this is not the method I would necessarily recommend. I'm just experimenting with how to do this. So what I did is I put it in a Ziploc bag and I took a rolling pin and I beat it, which was kind of fun, actually. It's a great way to get out a little aggression. So once it was powdered, I put it into a jar and sealed it. Theoretically, this should last 25 years, but I am new to freeze drying. I did find a few little pieces that weren't totally dry, so I'm going to use this stuff up pretty quickly. And I have about 6 more gallons of pumpkin to freeze dry in my fridge. So there's plenty more for me to experiment with. The best part of freeze drying this pumpkin, though, was that my 2.5-year-old loved the freeze-dried pumpkin. She ate 4.5 plates of this pumpkin in one sitting, and she was super happy about it. I didn't have to ask her to take an extra bite or anything. So this mama could not be happier with that. Some of that pumpkin I'm also just going to put in the regular freezer so I can use it that way too. So I have frozen pumpkin, I'll have freeze-dried pumpkin, and then I'm also just cooking some of it and using it for dinner this night. I am making a sausage and pumpkin sourdough skillet. So I chopped up some onions. I removed the casings from Italian or sweet Italian sausage. And then I just saute the sausage in a cast iron skillet and chop it up as best as I can with a turner. Normally I'd use a wooden spoon, but they were all dirty. So technically you can use metal on cast iron, but I really prefer to use wood because I can get a little bit crazy trying to chop up that sausage. Once the sausage is brown, I'm just throwing in the onion. I dropped a ton of it on the floor, which was super annoying, by the way. And then just cooking this until the onion's soft. Here I have some of the reserved pumpkin, and I am just putting it right into this skillet and mashing it up and letting it cook down. Some of it was a little undercooked, so this was a good opportunity just to let that soften up. I'm just adding a little salt and pepper here to season it. And then I'm just letting this cook until that pumpkin is nice and soft, probably for about 10 minutes or so. In the meantime, I am getting this sourdough topping prepared. So this is sourdough discard. I had a lot of sourdough discard that was left over from my sourdough starter video that I published about a week ago. You can check it out in the description box below. So for the doubled recipe, it's 3 cups of sourdough starter discard. It can be inactive, 6 eggs, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, and 6 tablespoons of melted butter. And I'm just giving that a really good mix. I have found that it's hard to mix until the butter is in there. So before you get too crazy trying to mix the eggs and the starter together, go ahead and get the butter in and then mix it. I don't know why. I'm sure there's a science behind it. I just don't know what it is, but that really helps combine everything and it mixes a lot easier that way. So I'm getting everything mixed here and ready to go while the rest of the skillet is cooking. Then I'm adding in some Parmesan cheese. This is some of the frozen Parmesan cheese. I have a whole video about freezer ingredients that I love to have prepared and on hand, and cheese is one of them. You can check that video out in the description box below. So I'm mixing in the cheese, and then I'm also adding in garlic powder and sage. I feel like any fall or early winter meal needs to have sage. I probably put in more than what anyone else would ever want, but sage is where it is at this time of year. Then I'm just pouring on the sourdough mixture right on top. It is as simple as that. You put it in the oven and bake. I think this was at 425 for about 20 to 25 minutes. The sourdough skillet meals are awesome because they use up anything you have around the house. I've just posted a video recently about pantry challenge meals. You can check that out in the description box below, but this is a great way to use up what you have in your pantry. I'm going to start recipe testing a cheeseburger sourdough skillet meal soon, so stay tuned for that. But you can see here when it's finished, you have a really nice and cozy biscuit topping on top of some protein and healthy vegetables. And it's a great way to use up what you have a nice, cozy early winter meal, and enjoy some seasonal homemaking as we say goodbye to fall and hello to winter. That's it for today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And thank you so much for tuning into Moon and Magnolia's YouTube channel, where we elevate the everyday from scratch and at home. And I'll see you again next time.